Hello, wonderful shifter. Welcome on board the shift. This is a touchy subject, but it is important to be addressed because just like individuals have a psyche and things that make them tick, so do collectives, cultures, nations that have they have their history, that gets settled into their generational either trauma or tendency, um, or reversal, uh, guilt. Let's talk about why American progressives and British progressives hate Israel. Okay. Let's break it down. First, we'll start with the progressive aspects of it. So, being progressive is associated with caring about human rights and doing what's right, and bringing justice, and correcting wrongs, and making the world a better place, right? Now, combine this with both America and Britain being one of the biggest historical colonizers in the history of society and of humanity. Okay, we know the white European that came to the Americas and the colonies and colonized the Native American tribes that were living on the land. It can be a discussion and a conversation in and of itself that is legitimate. However, I'll give you a little hint. This is a history that has existed in the other side of the globe from Israel. We'll get to that soon. Now let's talk about Britain. Britain quite literally colonized throughout history and the generations the entire globe, if not half of it. They were in Asia, they were in Europe, they were in America, they were in Africa. The reason English is so common is because of the British Empire. And the British also colonized Israel for 20 years between the 1920s and the 1940s. The land, some are saying now, oh, back then it was called Palestina. We'll get to that too. But basically, the land where the Jews inhabit. So you have here two nations that are great colonizers whom their young progressives who care about doing what's right carry a deep level of guilt, both conscientious, both guilt that they're aware of, that they want to see fixed or resolved. They want to fix the sins of their ancestors or grandparents or whatever the case may be, but also subconscious guilt. Now, combine this with a lot of them unwilling to um, pay the price that is required to actually correct this injustice. So, for example, if you'll ask most of the progressive Americans that hate Israel, many of them will tell you when you ask them, okay, so do you want to give America back to the Native Americans? A lot of them will answer, well, no, where will we go? Like, and they don't really have, those who answer that don't really have the self-awareness or even cognitive bandwidth to recognize the hypocrisy in that. So okay, so they want to correct the injustice that their ancestors have caused, but they don't want to do it themselves. They want the Jews to do it. Okay, let's go to the British. Similar thing. They are not going, they're still not giving Northern Ireland, for example, all of it back. They're still not giving the Scottish Scotland back. I don't see many of them protesting for giving these lands back to the Irish or to the Scottish. They do protest a lot for the Jews to do that. So already, even if, and the if matters here, even if the Jews were this white European colonizer that came and took over Palestina and turned it, all of that, still their hate and demands are, well, hypocritical. and unaware and unacceptable. If you want to correct something, start with yourself. And then once you do that, okay, once you start a movement that calls to give back the entirety of the Americas to the Native Americans, and once you start a movement that calls on, I don't know, the British monarchy to give back Scotland to the Scots and Northern Ireland to the Irish, until you do that, you should not be talking to anyone else. Now, let's take this a step further. And by the way, just a caveat, which why personally it's always cringe for me. The British actually colonized Israel when my grandfather was there. He lived there among with many other Jews that were living there before the Holocaust. You know, people have the um, I don't know, the assumption that before the Holocaust, Jews weren't in the land, which is could not be farther from the truth. Many Jews were in diaspora, which is the Jewish exile, yes, in Middle Eastern countries and European countries and Northern African countries, right? My grandparents from my other side were born in Casablanca. I don't want to go into that too much, but just to express some caveat of irony, the British put my grandfather in the land of Israel in a British prison that they had in Africa. So England taking over Israel, taking my grandfather, putting him in a prison in Africa, like three across three continents of oppression and colonialism. I don't think they're in a position to speak or preach to anyone. But okay, there's internalized guilt, there's inability to deal with it, there's also cowardice and hypocrisy and projection. I'm not going to do it, but you're going to do it, and I'm not going to even admit it to myself because I'm just not very self-aware or intelligent. Okay, now let's take this further. This is all if the Jews were colonizer themselves as well. However, to make matters worse for these, we'll say, haters, um, the Jewish people, before they were a religion, kind of like Native Americans are ethnicity, but they have shamanism. So you, even if you don't practice shamanism, you're still Native American. And, you know, even, and if you practice shamanism, but you're not Native, then you're not Native Americans, but it's connected, but it can be separated, right? So similarly, the Jewish people started as a people 3,800 years ago in Judea, the kingdom of Judea, which is where Israel is. Um, the same land, right? It was only called Palestina in the second century AC, so that was a very long time after the birth of the Jewish people as a people. And they are an ethnicity that now those people had values and ways of life that then turned also into a religion, right? So the Jewish people are native, indigenous of 4 millennia to the land of Israel, aka Judea. Okay. Um, to be clear, Jerusalem was the capital of the Jewish people, or the Israelites, or the Hebrews. Those are different words to describe the same people, by the way. Um, Jerusalem was their capital, and King David was its king before there was Christianity, definitely before there was Islam, before there was a Roman Empire, before there was um, Greek Greek Empire, before the Byzantine, before the Babylonians, before Buddhism was born. So that's how native and indigenous the Jewish people are to this land. So the Jewish people, the Israelites, are native to ancient Israel, aka Judea, in the seventh, and they've been present there throughout their sovereignty on the land, but also throughout other occupiers who took over them while they were there, amongst them, again, the Babylonians, the Byzantines, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, later on the Arab world in the 7th century. And then once the Arab world colonized, first, a Roman emperor in the 2nd century changed the name to Syria Palestina, which has nothing to do with Islam. Islam was born 400 years later. The Palestinian people that you know today are not connected. The name Palestina is based on a group of people from Greece called the Philistim that tried to occupy Israel in 2nd century BC. It's connected to Hanukkah, if you know, where the Israelites fought them and miraculously won. That's what we're celebrating in Hanukkah, our miraculous victory over the oppressor. And the Jews at the time, the Israelites, named them the Plishtim because in Hebrew, Polesh means invader. So in stories, they were referred to as the invaders from Greece, the Polshim. So it got kind of turned into Philistine. Now, those Greek invaders that tried to invade into Israel, they're not genetically connected to the Palestinians today. They're not the same people. Even if they were the same people, that would only further prove that they're not indigenous to the land. But I don't want to go too much into that. I want to circle back to America and Britain and other countries that might express some hypocrisy and bizarre upside down world kind of approach. So in the 7th century, when Islam was born, the Arab world then also, after others that have colonized Israel, it was already called Palestina. And just to, I think I forgot to clarify the point completely. So a Roman emperor in the 2nd century has nothing to do with Islam or the Palestinians today, named Israel Palestina as a third finger for the Jewish people in a way of like insulting them. Hey, the Philistines couldn't fully invade you, but us, the Romans, we've succeeded in invading you. So he literally named it the invasion in a word, in a Hebrew word, to insult and diminish the Israelites, the Jews of the land, and to erase their connection to the land, attempting to erase their connection to the land. That's how ironic this is, by the way, that the Palestinians of today chose to call themselves Palestinians. And it's like most of them don't know this, if any of them, because it's a deep level of history, but they literally, bottom line, named themselves the invaders. You can have your subjective emotional thoughts on it. I'm not here for that. I'm just here to state facts as much as possible. I know I insert my own emotion here and there, but that's because I'm human. But generally speaking, I'm trying to make it as much about facts. So keep in mind, even if I express emotion or say something sarcastic, it doesn't cancel the fact that everything I say is fact-based and that you can verify historically, archaeologically, etc. Okay, once again, I'm circling back to the point that I keep trying to circle back to. 7th century, the Arab world, now Muslim world, colonizes Israel, Palestina, and exiles many of its Jews to all the continents, right? Now, some Jews stayed, some were exiled to Eastern Europe, and then over the centuries, because they lived in Eastern Europe, their skin adapted and became more pale looking, so they pass as white. Many Jews fled to the Middle East, and many Jews fled to those are the Mizrahi Jews, and then there's the Sephardic Jews. Those are the Jews that fled to Spain and then were exiled into Portugal and then were exiled into Morocco. That's their route. And the Jews that fled slash exiled to the Middle East or northern Africa maintained their brown slash olive tone skin. Just so you'd understand why some Jews are white looking, some Jews are brown looking, some Jews are black, because the Jewish race is a race, but it's not a color based race. After the exile, the Jewish race was developed into sub ethnicity, right? Sub races. So there's Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic Jews. Just in case you were curious or if it helps giving you context. So after the Holocaust survivors came back to Israel. They're not white European colonizer. I don't know if you've seen any images of Holocaust survivors. They could barely pick up a stick or even chew. Okay, the United Nations voted on the return of the indigenous people to their land and to make sure that they always have a home so that the Holocaust could never happen again. That's why the United Nations was formed, by the way, right after the Holocaust to make sure that that could never happen again. And as part of that process, many nations across the globe that came together and to form the United Nations voted on reinstating, not newly instating, but reinstating Israel as a modern state. So it was the rebirth, reincarnation of Israel as an ancient land, as a modern state, that the Jews are now formally have sovereignty over their own land. Okay, so when you understand the story how it was without the extractions of a lot of details, because half a truth is a lie. Yeah, many of them came from Europe, but they're not from Europe, and they're not like the white Europeans that came to the Americas. Those are two very different stories with different backgrounds and different history and different circumstances. And just like Holocaust survivors came from Europe to the land of Israel in 1948, so did many Jews in the Middle East that, by the way, didn't necessarily, not all of them chose to, because some of them were generations already in those different countries, but they were forced out by many Arab countries. No one really speaks about the ethnic cleansing of Jewish people from Middle Eastern countries. 850,000 refugees, to be exact, that were exiled, ethnically cleansed from these um, Middle Eastern countries, and they came to Israel because of that. Some of them came because they wanted to come back to their native land, and some of them were forced. But either way, if you'll go back 70 years or a century, you'll see that there were tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or at least thousands of Jewish people in many different countries throughout the Middle East. Um, and now you'll see either zero or like a handful. So that was real ethnic cleansing. That was real exile. That was real, well, all the words, all the big words. And they also came to Israel as part of that. Again, not as colonizers. It's A, their land to begin with, and B, they were like refugees. Think about how progressives treat refugees today. Oh, they're fleeing persecution. Oh, we have to help them. Oh, we have to be there for them. But if it's the story of the Jews fleeing persecution, and not just to any country, to actually their own country, not only that we don't get love and protection from progressives, we are colonizers. I don't see progressives, the same progressives that refer to Israelis as colonizers or Jews as colonizers. I don't see them refer to, I don't know, refugees from the Middle East or refugees from Mexico or from the Ukraine or for I don't see them referring to them as colonizers. I see them protecting them and being like we should be there for them. But find how interesting it is to see the double standards. Recognize if the same person would have said something completely different about a different people in the same circumstances. But when it comes to the Jewish people, they somehow manage to warp it and conflate it into something evil. That is anti Semitism. Anti Semitism is double standards. Anti Semitism is taking something that usually you would consider as normal or even good with any other people, but somehow with Jews you manage to warp it and conflate it into something evil. That's anti Semitism. Anti Semitism is many other things, but when it comes to what we're talking about now, those two are the most relevant. And another one that is most relevant to this conversation is projection. The Jewish people in every century, in every generation, take the form of what the society they're in or what the culture is in, they're in, what it hates most. So for Hitler, all Jews were brown. To the standard American or British anti-Semites, because they hate white supremacy, and that's for American history, and that's completely legitimate. I'm not, but there's the premise of, oh, there's white supremacy because of the American history. Again, legitimate story in and of itself, but conflating it because this is the thing we hate most, right? White supremacists, okay? Colonizers, all the bad stuff. All the bad stuff that Americans dislike when they are an anti Semite, they project it onto the Jew. So a century ago, we were all brown and now we are all white. Wow, we shapeshifters. Amazing. Me specifically, I can do that. In the winter, I look completely white. In the summer, I look very brown. Like in the summer, when the Moroccan in me comes out, um, and in the winter, the Eastern European in me comes out because I'm um, uh, half of my lineage is the Jews that fled to Eastern Europe, and half of my lineage is the Jews that fled to Spain and then Portugal and then Morocco. So I'm half half. So I guess maybe when they talk about me, they can one day if they hate whites, they can tell me that I'm white, and one in the winter, and one day when they hate browns, they can tell me that I'm brown, but they can do it in the summer. So anyway, sorry, morbid humor. Um, so what do we have here? A lot of young people today coming from a background of colonizers won't give their own land back, but will demand the Jews to do so. If you ask them, they're like, "Oh no, we can't give it back. Where will we go?" But if you ask them, "Okay, well, where will Israelis go to?" And they're like, "Oh, they can go back to Europe." Actually, you can go back to Europe because your ancestors are actually from Europe. Do you see the level of irony plus lack of awareness? It's comic. If it wasn't so sad and so tragic and so dangerous, it would be comic. But then to make matters worse, like again, even if the Jewish people were colonizers, you don't have the entitlement or the right to say anything until you do something yourself. But to make matters so much worse, we are the natives that you claim to care about. You care about all the natives except for us. And here's the sad part. This is not history that you need to be brilliant to research or to discover. This is like you throw a rock anywhere in Israel, it will land on Jewish archaeology and history that is in archaeology and in documentations dating thousands of years back. Like literally, you can be a believer or a non-believer when it comes to religion, but both in the New Testament, the Christian New Testament, and in the Quran, the Muslim Quran, both came after Judaism and based themselves on the Torah. So, chronologically, if both of you wrote books that based themselves on a book that came long before you, who was there first chronologically? Like we are literally mentioned throughout the New Testament. The Israelites, the Jewish people are mentioned throughout the New Testament, dating back thousands of years back into Israel, and we're mentioned throughout the Quran. Now, you don't need to believe in God necessarily, or in spiritual events to also recognize that the New Testament and the Quran are based in faith, yeah, but they are also based in historic events because even if Jesus wasn't ascended into a God, it was still written based on a man called then Jesus, but originally Yehoshua. He was a Jewish rabbi who was born in Nazareth, who walked in Jerusalem, who spoke Hebrew, read Hebrew, wrote in Hebrew, taught in Hebrew, etc., in Jerusalem, in Israel, at least 2,000 years ago. So even if you don't believe that he turned into a god or whatever the case may be, even if you don't believe in the theological, spiritual aspect of it, it's still a historic event, an aspect of it, at least that there was a Jewish man over there 2,000 years ago who was a rabbi who spoke Hebrew. Like that already in and of itself should prove our how far we go back, and that's before Christianity existed. That's 700 years before, 600 plus years before Islam was born. So if you were born after us, you can't be more indigenous than us. Like it is so asinine, and it requires really basic intelligence to see that. But we know that anti-Semitism makes one stupid. People can be exceptionally intelligent, talented, skilled, awesome in so many other fields. But when it comes to Jewish people, they start suddenly make no sense and speak stupid, they're anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is not just pure evil that walks around with horns. Nazi Germany was a compilation of like artists and composers and scientists and doctors and it was a very advanced society that committed a great evil. The Nazis, after a day of work, they of eradication, they came back home, they kissed their children goodnight, and they checked in on their mother and father to see if they're okay, and they were nice to their neighbors while eradicating a race. So just because someone is intelligent in other fields, just because someone is talented in other fields, just because someone is very clear-minded in other stuff or very, very nice to you, that doesn't mean they're nice to the Jew. That doesn't mean they're not anti-Semitic or sick with hate. I have been exposed to even spiritual teachers online that are very good at what they do, whether astrology or whatever the case may be, but they are bonkers, ignorant anti Semites when it comes to the Jewish people, and that is dangerous. If a white person is very nice to other white people, but they're disgusting to black people, so they're nice to you, okay, does that make them a nice person? No, they're still a racist. So if they're nice to you or other stuff, but they are terrible to the Jew or to the Israeli, they're not nice. They're not a good person. Okay, talent doesn't mean goodness. Intelligence doesn't mean goodness. You can be very talented and very intelligent and very evil. Or vice versa. You can be stupid and incapable, but very good. But just to be clear, it's not an equation. You can be stupid and incompetent and also evil, and you can be brilliant and talented and beautiful and also very good. So, goodness versus badness, good versus evil, is not reliant on whether or not the person is talented or not, smart or not, strong or not. Okay, this is what confuses many people. Israel now, the Jewish people, it's like the power ratio has changed. The only difference between now and back then in Nazi Germany is the Jewish people have a government and an IDF and a power to fight back and to defend themselves. But the intent of the world didn't change. And the ideology of the Nazis didn't die with Hitler. There are nations today who want to continue what he started, to finish up what he started. And that's what Israel is dealing with right now and fighting with. But people confuse it because, well, they seem really weak and you, the Jews, seem really strong, hence the weak are good and the strong is the oppressor and the bad. No. If we didn't have the IDF, if we weren't strong when it comes to intent and desire, this alleged weak side, boohoo, would have already eradicated us. That's what you need to understand. All the hundreds of thousands of rockets that were sent onto Israel in the past 2 decades, if we didn't have the Iron Dome, we would be flattened. I wouldn't be here. They're not aiming at base camps, they're aiming at civilians. So someone intended on taking down, unaliving your entire family, but they failed because you have a good security system, so they should not be prosecuted. And then if you call the cops on them, you would like the cops to tell you, well, you have a security system and you're fine. So what, you want me to put them in prison and take away their freedom? I mean, yeah, they tried to take down your entire family, but they didn't. And you're like, yeah, but not because they weren't trying. It's just I have a good alarm system and I have a good security system, but they wanted. But you're so strong and look at your house and it's so beautiful and you have this alarm and you have this and they live in this shed. It's like, yeah, but I didn't do anything to them to deserve this. And they tried to take down my children and all of us. They just failed. You're a very bad person. Like that's how I love you, world, but you have a way to go. So any American progressive or British progressive or another progressive that cares about human rights, if it's for you, if it's for them and for you, but not for the Jew, it's not inclusive. If it's for them and you and not the Jew, it's not diverse. If it's them and you, but not the Jew, it's not equality. It's anti Semitism and racism. It's a Trojan horse. Let me tell you something about propaganda. It's half truth sneaking in the lie. And you don't notice because, well, there's a lot of truth in that paragraph as well. It's a Trojan horse. That's how propaganda works. They're not just going to say lie, 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 because then you'll recognize it very easy. It will be a house of cards very easy to collapse. But if it's a brick wall of a truth and a truth and a truth, and then suddenly a brick that is really off and it's a lie, but then truthful and good brick, like you look at this wall and most of it seems fine. Yeah, equity, diversity, inclusion to them and to them and to them. It's so beautiful. Just not the Jew, but okay, the Jew is an imperialist, colonialist, occupier, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but look at how beautiful everything else that they're saying. And then, it's a small brick that is off. So you walk past it, and before you know it, you don't even notice it. But it's already, and it's okay. The wall is, we're not going to bother in fixing it. It's mostly fine. But that little corrupt brick of hate is already embedded deep in your psyche in a way that will be so hard to pull out. But you have to break that wall and rebuild it with full truth. This is when context actually matters. Context is not doesn't always matter. You know what I'm talking about. But this is where context matters. So don't let Trojan horses lure you in. Read the whole thing. The whole thing. And if there's a part of it that is really off and really wrong, don't be like, oh, it's okay. It's mostly true and it's better than other options. Let's just let it be like that. That is compromising with evil is evil. It's like compromising with poison. Oh, I'll just take 2 little drops, not 10 drops. I'll take 2 drops of poison and 8 drops of orange juice. You're still going to drop unalive, or at least your organs becoming really sick. No, you want 10 drops of juice. Some things you can have in moderation, there's a little bit of that, and some things, no. And propagandists are very aware of how your psyche works. Okay, Hitler's youth in the 1920s, 2 decades before the Holocaust itself. It was an after school curriculum for German kids. They had after school activities, they had sports and competitions, and they gained all kinds of skills. And in between, they were taught about how Jews spread non healthy stuff, non health illnesses, and all the other stuff. But German parents sent their kids into these camps because, well, it's great. It keeps them busy, it strengthens them, it educates them, and yeah, that's all that stuff. But maybe it's true and maybe it's not, but there's so many good stuff, other stuff. That is why American universities now are decay, in absolute decay, because Middle Eastern countries sent billions of dollars to them and the money is great and they build this monument and they build this library and they share truthful things and they express the need of rights to this minority and that minority, but then they also embed in the history classes false history of the Middle East, reversed history. In this part, Americans know it's true. This part, Americans know it's true. And they're not really familiar with Middle East stuff. But if they say this and I know it's true, and they say this, then I know it's true. Then when they say this, it must also be true. The minds of of young generations in America and England are occupied by rot that is spreading. And you need to stop it now. You need to do something. You need to save your country. Because let me tell you, and we'll finish with this. historically for millennia, every single society throughout the continents, every single society, culture, country that has allowed its Jewish people to be persecuted and then either exiled them and or had them flee shortly after, immediately even, the society itself collapsed. Where is the Roman Empire? Where is the Greek Empire? Where are the Byzantines? Where are the Babylonians? Where are the Nazis? And yeah, there are fringe of them that still exist, and now they've reincarnated into a different language, but still the same things that are said, yes, but they themselves, they're not a part of our society, right? So the jihadi extreme fundamentalist groups, countries, people that are trying to eradicate the Jewish people now that have embedded themselves in the minds of progressed Westerners, just like they did in Europe. Europe was progressed relatively then, right? They too shall fail and collapse. Because I don't know what you believe in, but things that are based in a lie and in hate never survive long. And if you need to distort history and distort events and lie and lie and lie to push your agenda, then your agenda is the evil one. You are not on the right side. If you can't use truth to win a debate, if you have to lie and distort to win a debate, you've already lost the debate. And dear America and dear England, and there, we can talk about other countries, but I wanted to focus on them, on you guys. This is not just about us, honey bunnies, about the Jewish people, the Israeli people. This is about you too. I actually care about you. America, I had the American dream. Love it. Save yourself from the hate and the rot that is eating you on the inside. Act now. Am Israel Chai.